But this is our Bible Museum website. We just started this about a month ago. And so we've got a lot of information on there that's great information for homeschoolers. My friend Joel Kramer, who is the archaeologist I work with in Israel, all of his videos are on our website. But you can go to YouTube and look up his channel if you want to, which is Expedition Bible, or you can watch his videos on our Bible Museum website. And so, I would encourage all of you to do that. So our next talk we're going to be talking about is one of our favorite Bible discussions, our favorite Bible lessons, which has to do with the Assyrian Conquest. And again, this is an ancient story. It's 2,800 years old, and it's a battle over Israel, and there's a famous battle that takes place during the Assyrian Conquest called the Battle for Lachish. And that battle is a major part that we're going to talk about in our discussions as well today. It's the most well-documented ancient battle in all of history, the Battle for Lachish. This discussion is going to be built upon written texts and ancient archaeology that proves the story that we're going to study today to be absolutely true. And it's an important story in our Bibles. Okay? So the biblical account of the Assyrian conquest is questioned by skeptics, as pretty much every important story in the Bible is questioned by skeptics. And often skeptics will agree that the Bible contains at least some true history, but they'll deny all of the supernatural elements, all the miracles of the story. So the story we're going to be looking at today, this Assyrian conquest, it concludes with one of the greatest miracles in the Bible. And this supernatural miracle is supported by the archaeology of Israel. So the archaeology actually undergirds that miracle so that we can see that the miracle actually did happen and really is true. So first we want to talk about archaeology, or about geography, because geography is an important part of every biblical story. This is a map of Middle Earth from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, okay? So if you read the book and you take the clues given in the book and create a map, you'll end up with a map like that. But how many of you think we could find Middle Earth on a map of the world somewhere in the world? Well, you wouldn't find it. Why? Because it's a fiction story. It's not a story that's factual. It's a made-up story. This is important because if the geography of an ancient text does not match the real world, then most likely it's not a true story. There's real geography that connect to these stories, and if it's not real, then it's probably not a real story. So the ancient Assyrian Empire was north of Israel. Its capital was Nineveh, so you can see in the purple part up there, right underneath Assyria, is the capital city of Nineveh. And this is the ancient Assyrian Empire. So we know exactly where it was. We know where their capital city was. They conquered all the way down into Babylon, and then they conquered the Hittites and all the way down into Israel. They conquered northern Israel, and then they came down into Judah, which is where our story is going to be focused on today, is that conquest. So today, the ancient Assyrian Empire, we cover most of the nations of Turkey, Iran, and Iraq. It's a very large empire. So next, we need to consider some archaeology. So is there any direct archaeology that we can use to connect with the story? And one of the biggest pieces that we have is this wall. So this wall is called Hezekiah's Broad Wall. It was built by King Hezekiah in the late 8th century BC. And this was a massive wall. Right now, the wall is much shorter than it was in Isaiah's time, and in Hezekiah's time. In Hezekiah's time, this wall would have been 3 stories tall, 28 to 30 feet tall. So you can see the little guy standing behind the fence in the center of the picture there. That's a guy. That's not a child. That's an adult. And if you see how big that wall is compared to that guy, that's what we're talking about. This is a massive wall that was built by King Hezekiah. At the time that wall was built, the entire army of Israel could have fit on top of that wall. It's a huge wall. And that wall was built to protect Jerusalem from the Assyrian conquerors that were coming in. Something else that we have, and there's something that's right up here for you to look at, is a seal that was made by King Hezekiah. Not personally, but by his regime. So these jars that are on the left-hand side with the 4 handles, all of those handles have a stamp on them. And that stamp is the same as this right here. So this is King Hezekiah's seal on this handle. And this is a real piece of archaeology. So this is 2,800 years old. The top of this, so the top of the seal, it's got a scarab in the middle. The top of it says belonging to the king. And the king that made these was Hezekiah. And then underneath the seal is an inscription that says for Zoko. And Zoko was a Judahite city. So this pot was created by King Hezekiah's pot makers with his stamp on it to go to Zoko to collect his taxes to put in this pot in Zoko. So this is a part of a pot handle. So you can come up and look at that later. So these handles were made, King Hezekiah made thousands of pots like this. He had them made for different cities. So some of them say for the king, belonging to the king for Zoko, belonging to the king for Lachish, belonging to the king for Hebron, belonging to different cities. So he had these pots put in these different cities. They collected taxes in them, kept them in the cities, and they were hoping that when the Assyrian army came in, that the people could go into the walled cities and they would have enough food to survive and weather the attack of the Assyrians, but it didn't work. And virtually all of these pots and virtually all of these handles are broken that we find today because the Assyrians crushed Judah at that time. So question, what would you say is the most important tool for an archaeologist? What do you think? What's the most important tool an archaeologist uses today? Okay, the Bible's a very good tool, and that's going to be what I'm looking for. But what other tools do archaeologists use? Anybody know? What do? Shovels, they dig. Hose, buckets, brushes, all kinds of things. But the most important tool for an archaeologist is the written text. And so this is an archaeologist who's famous in Israel. His name is Amnon Bentor. And he passed away in 2023, very sadly. He was a very old man. He excavated in the city of Hazor, which was the capital city of the Canaanites, for 50 years. And what he was looking for in all of those 50 years was the library in Hazor. Because they knew that Hazor was communicating with other libraries, with a Hittite library in the Hittite nation, with another library in the area of Babylon. And so they were looking for the library, and he looked for 50 years and he never found the library. But they knew there still is a library there somewhere. It's just very hard to find. But this is what Amnon Bentor used to say about how important the written text is for every archaeologist. And he was an old Hebrew archaeologist, so he had a very, very strong Israeli accent. So I'm going to try to have his accent while I give you this little talk. So he said this: without the written text, all you have are dirt and bones and rocks and pots. The written text is the soul of archaeology. Without the written text, you have nothing. Because you don't know what happened unless you have the text. All you have are the broken pots and the dirt and the bones. That's all you have. But when you have the written text, then you can identify what you're looking at, and that's how important the written text is. So for this story, we have 2 primary written texts. One of them is the Prism of Sennacherib. And so there's actually 3 of these. One of them's in the Israel Museum, and 2 of them are in the British Museum. This is a replica. And this text was created by King Sennacherib, describing the conquest of what the Bible's talking about, the Assyrian conquest. So we have an external text that's describing the same events as the biblical event. So you've got this corroboration going on between the 2 of these texts. And then the other one, and I need some help. So I need maybe 4 kids. Come up. Come on up, guys. Help me. I need some help. Come on up. The other written text is called the Great Isaiah Scroll. And I've created come on. I've created a replica of it to show you. I want you to understand this is a significant text. Come over here, grab onto this. Okay, you hold that part of it. Okay, we're going to roll this out, and then I want each of you to grab onto part of it. So, okay, come on down. Scooch down this way. Come down this way. I need you to help me hold this. We got to hold it all the way out here. This is the great Isaiah scroll. This is not an insignificant text, people. This is a complete book of Isaiah, a complete scroll of Isaiah found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this text dates to at least 125 BC. So this is the great Isaiah scroll. And this is part of the text we're going to be looking at today is out of this scroll right here. So we can all lay this down real carefully. Everybody lay it down. We'll just leave it laying here for people to come look at later. Okay? There we go. Again, don't step on it if it's possible. This is just a print, so it's not like invaluable, but I want you to understand this is significant. We're not talking about just a fragment of the book of Isaiah. This is almost complete book of Isaiah, and those are the two main texts we're going to be looking at today. We also have the Lachish reliefs. So this room is a room in the British Museum today. It was a room in Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh, and it was called the Lachish room. And this inscription, that's a whole wall inscription, is the battle for Lachish, which was the most powerful city in Israel, second to only to Jerusalem itself. And he created this carving of this battle. It's like a stone movie picture describing every step of the conquest of Lachish and how he took out the city of Lachish. So that's a very important piece of archaeology. And then we also have the Azekah inscription that we're going to talk about in our talk today as well. So because the nation of Israel would not serve the true and living God, this is what Isaiah prophesied. The Lord, or Yahweh, the God of Israel, is about to bring against them, which is the kingdom of northern Israel, the mighty floodwaters of the Euphrates, the king of Assyria with all his pomp. It will overflow all its channels, run over all its banks, and sweep on into Judah, swirling over it, passing through it, and reaching up to the neck. So what he's describing is a flood that's going to flood into Israel. That flood is an army from Assyria that's going to flood in, and it's going to get so desperate for Israel that it's like a flood that comes up higher and higher and higher until it's up to your neck. And if it goes any higher, you die. The whole nation dies. And that's what he's describing in this text right here. The Assyrians were masters of destruction. Isaiah, in his scroll, it also says this: "Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger. I send him against a godless nation," which is Israel, "to seize loot and snatch plunder. But this is not what Sennacherib intends. This is not what he has in mind. His purpose is to destroy, to put an end to many nations." So when the Assyrians came in, they had an agenda to wipe out nations. That's exactly what they did. So how did they do that? How did Sennacherib end nations? This is what he claimed in his prism. So in the prism that's right here, this is a part of that prism. It says, "In the course of my campaign, I surrounded, captured, and carried off the spoil of every city who did not bow in submission at my feet quickly." And that's an absolutely true statement. The Assyrians crushed everybody that stood against them. So the Assyrians destroyed virtually every fortified city in the Middle East. This was the first step in their evil plot to utterly destroy and to put an end to nations. They completely leveled their cities. So they had these fortified cities protecting their country, and they just leveled them and burned them. That's the first step. The next step was very sinister in this plan. And as an example, this is what Sennacherib wrote. He said, "I drew near to the city of Ekron, the Philistine city of Ekron, and slew the officials and nobles who had committed the crime and hung their bodies on posts around the city." So when he would go into a city, he would conquer the city, he would capture the nobles or the kingly dynasty, and they were being punished for committing the crime, which was not paying taxes to Assyria. And then they would kill them and put their bodies on posts around the city. They were very gnarly, wicked people, okay? So the way he would do this is Sennacherib would have his men flay alive the captured nobles. In front of the city they were attacking, so he would capture some nobles, take them to the next city, and then in front of that city he would flay these guys alive. Now this is from the Lachish relief. So this is happening right in front of Lachish. These guys that are all stretched out here, these are Jews. These are Jewish nobles. They're probably related to King Hezekiah. And these Assyrians are literally skinning them alive. That's how they would die, in front of the city that they were conquering. And then he would take their dead bodies and he would hang them on posts around the city to totally intimidate the city that he was attacking. And basically he was just saying, this is what I'm going to do to you. So they were wicked people. Following the destruction of every fortified city, Sennacherib then deported the native people to foreign lands. So this is what the book of Isaiah or 2 Kings says. This is what happened to Samaria. The king of Assyria marched against Samaria and laid siege to it. At the end of 3 years, the Assyrians took it. So Samaria was captured, and the king of Assyria deported Israel, which was the northern 10 tribes of Israel, to Assyria. So he destroyed all the cities. He killed the dynasty, the kingly dynasty, and then he deported the people out of their native country to a foreign land, and then he would bring in foreign captives and put them in place of those people. And at that point, the nation ceased to exist, never recovered. That's what happened to Aram, and we're going to learn that's what happened to northern Israel in our story. So why did God judge northern Israel so harshly? I mean, that's pretty harsh, isn't it? The Bible says Israel followed idols. They left all the commandments of Yahweh, their God, made for themselves a molded image and 2 calves, and they worshiped the host of heaven and served Baal. And they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah alone. So Israel was shedding innocent blood. They were burning their sons and daughters in the fire to Baal. Can you imagine that? Why would they do that? Well, because King Ahab, the king of northern Israel, he married a Phoenician princess. Her name was Jezebel. And she brought the worship of her god, which was the god Baal, the god of the Phoenicians, brought her god into northern Israel. She started practicing the practices of the worship of Baal in northern Israel, and the people followed their example. So it's really important, kids, who you marry. Ahab, King Ahab, who was a Jewish king, married an unbeliever named Jezebel, who was a wicked person, and she took the whole nation into idolatry. So in fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, the Assyrians did indeed sweep on into Judah. They took out northern Israel, and then they swept down into Judah. And in the Azekah inscription, Sennacherib recorded this: "Against the land of Judah I marched, against the province of Hezekiah. The city Azekah I besieged, I captured, I carried off its spoil, I destroyed, I devastated, I burned with fire." And that's what he did to every city. So as you have to imagine this, all the cities in the Middle East, they're all crushed, burned. All the cities of northern Israel are gone. All the cities of Aram are gone. He's coming into Judah. He's doing the same thing to the cities of Judah. All the fortified cities are disappearing. Isaiah 36:1 says this: "In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them." All of them. So if you're Hezekiah, what are these fortified cities in place for? So you're in Jerusalem, and you've got fortified cities that surround your capital. All of those cities are to protect you. Now they're all gone. He took them all. They're gone. The final city to fall in Judah was Lachish. That's the Lachish relief that we talked about earlier. And right above Sennacherib's head, so just up to the left of Sennacherib's head, above the guy that's standing right in front of Sennacherib, seated on his throne there, is an inscription. This is what that inscription says. Sennacherib, the mighty king, king of the country of Assyria, sitting on the throne of judgment before the city of Lachish, I give permission for its slaughter. Now, what would that mean? I give permission for my army to slaughter this city. What does that mean? Don't take any prisoners. Kill the whole city. I want to make an example of this city. The next city is Jerusalem. I want to make an example of this city. When Lachish was excavated, they found this, which is a mass grave of Israelite warriors. These are skulls. This is just the beginning of this grave. Notice how many of them have holes in their heads. Their skulls have been broken. They slaughtered the whole city. They buried him in a mass grave, and this is the mass grave that they excavated. So he didn't take any prisoners, and he's sending a really grim message to Jerusalem. So why was the Assyrian army so powerful? They crushed everybody. They were really powerful because the Assyrian soldiers were armed with iron weapons hundreds of years before their time. No other army at this time period had iron weapons. Iron swords, iron spear tips, iron arrow tips. And also in this picture you can see the slingers. So see behind the archers, see the guys with the bows in the front. Behind the archers are guys that are slinging stones. And those slingers are behind the archers because they could sling stones farther than archers could shoot arrows at that point in history. And so they would bombard the city with sling stones. So these are some of the weapons that we have in our museum. I didn't want to bring them for fear of losing them in my checked-on luggage. But these are Assyrian arrow tips. They're iron. This is an Assyrian spear tip, and it's iron. The reason they crushed everybody is because they were so far ahead of their times. And so for you to understand this, the Assyrians crushed everybody. And you're going to find out why they fell, why their empire fell so quickly at the end of our story. But the empire that followed the Assyrians was the Babylonians. The Babylonians, they armed their entire army with bronze. Not nearly as strong as iron. The Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. The Persians armed their whole empire, their whole army with bronze. The Persians were conquered by the Greeks, the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire armed their whole army with bronze. So the Assyrians are like hundreds of years ahead of their time. And then finally, after the Greeks, you have the Roman Empire, which is the Iron Empire. And they armed their army with iron, and then they crushed everybody too. So that's the reason the Assyrians were so powerful, was because they armed their army with iron. These are some of the Assyrian sling stones. These are from the Israel Museum and the British Museum. This is an Assyrian sling stone from Israel. So you're welcome to come and pick it up and hold it. This is what they would sling at these people. So if you were an Israelite in the city of Lachish and the Assyrian army's out there shooting at you, and if you stuck your head up, you were in danger of being hit in the head by one of those rocks. Because an Assyrian slinger, Roman slingers as well, they could sling stones and hit a person's face at 100 yards. So if you stuck your head up, they were shooting for your face. And that's the reason in that grave there were so many skulls with holes in their skulls, because they got hit in the head with those rocks. So those are part of the empire's war machine. So this is how Sennacherib's prism recounts the victories against Judah. Because Hezekiah, king of Judah, would not submit to my yoke, I came up against him by force of arms, and by the might of my power I took 46 of his strong-walled cities. Now the Bible just says he took all of them. Sennacherib tells us how many he took, 46 of them. I made to come out from them 200,150 people, young and old, male and female. So he captured 200,000 people. So like northern Israel, Judah is now being deported. They're being taken out of their country. So at this point, Jerusalem is the only fortified city left in Judah, actually in all of Israel. The nation of Israel at this point is in grave danger of ceasing to exist. And if Israel ceases to exist, then our whole history of the Bible changes right here. It's a very important moment in history. Isaiah the prophet lamented the destruction. He said this, "Your country is desolate. Your cities burned with fire. Your fields are being stripped by foreigners right before you, laid waste as when overthrown by strangers. Daughter Zion," which is another term for Jerusalem, "is left like a shelter in a vineyard, like a hut in a cucumber field, like a city under siege. Unless the Lord Almighty had left us some survivors, we would have become like Sodom. We would have been like Gomorrah." So when I say that Israel was in danger of ceasing to exist, Isaiah is acknowledging that here. He said, unless the Lord would have intervened, we would have ceased to exist like Sodom and Gomorrah ceased to exist. So he's describing that. So this is an interesting picture. We took this picture in Israel one day. Joel and I, we were traveling down the highway one day, and we looked off to our right, and we both saw this, and then we looked at each other, and Joel said to me, he said, "Was that a hut in a cucumber field?" I said, "I think it was." He says, "We've got to get a picture of that." So we went back, stopped, and this is a cucumber field. Now, before the cucumbers are harvested, there would have been men staying in that hut, and they would have been protecting the cucumbers from the birds and stuff that would come in and eat the cucumbers. But this cucumber field has been harvested, and now the only thing left is the hut in the middle. And that's what Isaiah is using to describe the situation, the plight of Israel right now. Israel has been harvested by the Assyrians. They're all gone. The only thing left is the hut in the middle. How defensible do you think that hut will be? That's what Jerusalem was. It was just like a hut. And the Assyrian army would have taken Jerusalem out just like they took out all the other cities without God's help, without God's assistance. So why was Judah also judged so harshly by God? What happened in Judah? Why did Judah get judged like this? The Bible tells us you, speaking of Judah, have walked in the way of your sister, northern Israel. Therefore, I will give her cup into your hand. Why? Because they have committed adultery, and innocent blood is on their hands. They committed adultery with their idols. They even sacrificed their children, whom they bore to me, as food for them. So now Judah is doing the same thing that northern Israel was doing. Why? Why would Israel start worshiping Baal, the god of the Phoenicians? Well, because the king of Judah had married Athaliah, who was the daughter of Jezebel and Ahab. So kids, it's really important who you marry. You got to marry the right person, somebody that believes the way we believe, that believes in the Bible, that trusts the Bible. You don't want to marry an unbeliever. They're going to bring bad things into your life, and that's what's happening here. And so Athaliah brought child sacrifice into Judah. And because God had to judge northern Israel for that sin, he also had to judge Judah for that sin. And that's why this judgment is falling on them. So Micah the prophet, he's a contemporary with Isaiah. He lived at the same time as Isaiah. He wrote this, "I will surely gather all of you, Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a pen, like a flock in its pasture. The place will throng with people." So he's describing what Jerusalem's going to look like at this time in history. He says they're going to be like a sheep pen, crammed full of sheep. And this is a sheep pen in Israel. So in Israel, there's hundreds of these all over the countryside. And the shepherds, when they get ready to bed their flock down for the night, they find one of these pens and they stick their sheep in the pen. And then the shepherd becomes the gate. So you can see the opening in the sheep pen with the guy sitting in it. That's the gate to the sheep pen. And that connects to some New Testament stories where Jesus says that he's the gate to the sheep pen. Well, this is what Jerusalem's being described as being. But notice what he says, that God's going to gather all of Jacob. What's all of Jacob? How many tribes are there, sons of Jacob? 12. So he's going to gather all 12 tribes of Jacob together. He's going to bring together the remnant, not of Judea, the remnant of Israel, and he's going to put them all in a pen together, and the place is going to throng with people. And so this is what Jerusalem's being described as looking like, because when an enemy army came in and started attacking a nation, started destroying a nation, there was always a remnant of the people that would escape. Where did that remnant flee to? Well, they all fled down to King Hezekiah in Jerusalem. And at this point in history, Jerusalem grew a lot. So here's a note about the lost 10 tribes of Israel, because I think we often hear about the lost 10 tribes of Israel, and we kind of think they wandered off and got lost or something, right? But that's not what happened to them. The people of northern Israel and over 200,000 people from Judah were captured by the Assyrians and deported as slaves. They were scattered amongst the nations that Assyria had conquered, and they were absorbed into the cultures where they lived. So in the 8th century BC, these people that had been captured by Sennacherib, they lost their identity as Israelites. They were sold off as slaves. Within one generation, they had lost their identity. So the remnant that escaped fled to Jerusalem, and during the Assyrian siege, the city of Jerusalem grew 15 times bigger. Imagine Noblesville growing 15 times bigger just in a few years. That's what happened to Jerusalem, because all these refugees are fleeing down out of northern Israel. So the broad wall was built. We talked about it earlier in our slide presentation, the broad wall of Hezekiah. It was built to enclose this huge refugee camp that housed all the Israelites from every tribe who had escaped from the Assyrian conquest. So now, all of Israel is in one little spot. If that one little spot gets wiped out, then Israel ceases to exist. Serious, very serious. At this point, Hezekiah's broad wall enters into the story. Now remember, this is just the bottom of that wall. This wall was actually 3 stories tall, 28 to 30 feet tall. This was a huge wall. We just have the bottom of it still left in archaeology. So Isaiah 36 verses 11 through 22 says this: "The king of Assyria sent his field commander to Jerusalem with a great army to deliver a message to King Hezekiah." Hezekiah's officials said, "Please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. Do not speak to us in the language of Judah within the hearing of the people who are on the wall." So where's the army of Israel when the Assyrian army comes? Where did the army of Israel go? Well, they're up on the wall. The officials that went out said, "You can talk to us in your native language," because that's the language of Assyria is Aramaic. "You can speak to us in Aramaic, we understand that. You don't need to speak to us in the language of the people who are on the wall." And then the field commander said, "Has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the men who are sitting on the wall, who are doomed with you to eat their own dung and drink their own urine?" And that's what happens when a city gets sieged. They start to starve to death. They don't have enough water. They don't have enough food. And so what do? Well, it gets really hard and really bad. And that's what he's describing here. So these people that are sitting on the wall, they're sitting on that wall right there, listening to what the field commander's telling them. Then Sennacherib's field commander made a grave mistake. He blasphemed Israel's God. I want you to notice this. He actually uses the name of Israel's God and he blasphemes him. Listen to what he says. "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He cannot deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah mislead you when he says, 'Yahweh will deliver us.' Have the gods of any nation ever delivered their lands from the hands of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arphad? Have the gods rescued Samaria from my hand? Who of all the gods of these countries have been able to save their lands from me? How then can Yahweh deliver Jerusalem from my hand?" Now that was a big mistake, because the other gods that he's blaspheming, they're idols. This is the real God, the living God that he's blaspheming, and he has no idea what he's doing. So things are getting extremely desperate for Hezekiah at this point. This is what Sennacherib wrote in his prison. But as for Hezekiah the Jew, who did not bow in submission to my yoke, Hezekiah himself I shut up like a bird in a cage within Jerusalem, his royal city. I put watchposts strictly around it and turned back to his disaster any who went out of its city gate. And so Jerusalem now has been sieged by the Assyrians, which means the Assyrian army has Jerusalem surrounded. They're not letting anybody in. They're not letting anybody out. They're not letting any supplies in. So Jerusalem is just trapped. King Hezekiah is trapped in Jerusalem. And what's going to happen to King Hezekiah if Sennacherib breaks through the wall and captures him? What's Sennacherib going to do to him and to his sons? Flay them alive. So this is desperate, right? Okay, then King Hezekiah did the smartest thing he could have ever done. He built the wall taller. Is that what he did? He made iron weapons for his soldiers so they could fight against the Assyrians. Is that what he did? No. Hezekiah prayed. That was the smartest thing he could have ever done. And this is what he said. Yahweh Almighty, the God of Israel, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, Lord, and see. Listen to all the words Sennacherib has sent to ridicule the living God. And so what he's doing here is interesting, because idols have ears, right? But they can't hear anything. Idols have eyes, but they can't see anything. They can't respond. Isaiah is saying, you're not an idol. You have real eyes. You can see. You have real ears. You can hear. You can respond to what's happening here. It's true, Lord, the Assyrian kings have laid waste all the nations in their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by human hands. Now, Yahweh, our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Yahweh, are the only God. So Hezekiah is saying, if you save us from this army, it's going to send a message to the whole world that you're the only living God. You're the only God that can save from an army like this. That's what Hezekiah is saying. Sennacherib sent letters to Hezekiah. The Bible tells us about that. And the Bible says Hezekiah took the letters in and laid them in the temple of Yahweh before the Lord and said, Lord, you have to save us. So evidently, God had Isaiah send this message to Sennacherib. This is addressed to Sennacherib. Listen to what it says. Whom have you reproached and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted up your eyes on high? Against the Holy One of Israel. Because your rage against me has come up to my ears, therefore I will put my hook in your nose and my bridle in your mouth, and I will turn you back by the way which you came. So Isaiah threatened King Sennacherib. Where's Isaiah? Well, he's trapped in Jerusalem too. So think about Sennacherib at this point. He's destroyed these nations. He's destroyed all these cities. There's only one city left, and he actually saved this one city for last because Hezekiah was the king who caused the revolt against Assyria. He talked all the other nations around him into all stopping paying taxes at the same time. So he was the problem. He was the source of the problem. And Sennacherib saved his city for the last because he wanted to make an example of Hezekiah. And so at this time, Isaiah's trapped, Hezekiah's trapped. They destroyed everything. And now they're threatening Sennacherib. How serious do you think Sennacherib's going to take this threat? He's like, yeah, I've heard that before. Right? Okay. Then God sent this message of comfort to Hezekiah. Thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there. He won't even attack. Nor come before it with shield, nor build a siege mound against it. And that's how they were taking out these cities. They would build a ramp against the city wall, and then they would take their war machine up and break in the wall, and then their army would flood in through they would take over the city. That's how they did it. He says he's not going to build a siege mount against your wall. He's not going to even attack. By the same By the same way that he came, the same he shall return. And he shall not come into this city, says the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. And God's kind of telling Hezekiah and Israel, look, I'm not saving the city because you're so wonderful. You're not so wonderful. I'm saving the city for my sake and for David's sake. Okay? So what happens next, honestly, I think is kind of anticlimactic. Because it's been building, right? You know, this big battle, the destruction all the way down to Jerusalem. They've got Jerusalem surrounded, and you can kind of imagine how God's going to empower all the warriors. They're going to go out and fight this great battle and defeat everybody, and it's going to, that's kind of how you think it will end. But that's not what happened. Listen to what happened. Then the angel of the Lord went out and killed in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. One angel. Take care of it. The army's gone. Wow. And when the king and his nobles arose early in the morning, there were the corpses all dead. So Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed and went away, returned home, and remained at Nineveh. And the Assyrian empire only lasted about 75 years before the Babylonians crushed them. They didn't have an army anymore. They couldn't defend themselves anymore. Their army had been destroyed by the God of Israel. So this is a huge miracle, okay? Jerusalem's the only city the Assyrian army sieged that escaped destruction. Every other city they sieged, they completely destroyed. In fact, Jerusalem's the only city in Israel and in most of the Middle East that was not completely leveled and burned by fire, which is interesting because if you're an archaeologist in Israel and you're excavating in any city in Israel except for Jerusalem, you're going to find the Assyrian destruction layer. And Joel, he says he loves to ask archaeologists this question. He comes to a city that's being excavated and the archaeologists are working. And he says, hey, have you guys come to the Assyrian destruction layer yet? And the archaeologists are like, oh, yes, come see. Look at this destruction. It's a meter deep. They destroyed the Assyrians. They burned the city. They destroyed the entire city. And Joel's like, yeah, they pretty much destroyed everything, didn't they? Yes, the Assyrians, they destroyed everything. He says, except for one city, right? They didn't destroy Jerusalem. And then the archaeologists are like, yeah, you're right. Yes, only Jerusalem. And then Joel says, why? Now, if they're biblical and they believe in the Bible, they know why. They'll say, well, because God saved Israel. God sent his angel into the camp of the Assyrians, and he just saved Israel. But if they're secular, they don't believe in miracles. So here's what they say. We don't know. Because there is no other explanation. There's no explanation they can give that matches history at all. Why did they leave? Why didn't they attack? They had Jerusalem sieged. Hezekiah was the final linchpin that they were trying to destroy to crush this rebellion. Why would they just leave him alone? There's no other explanation. And every city has an Assyrian destruction layer. But when they excavate Jerusalem, there's no Assyrian destruction layer. The only city. That's a miracle. So we have archaeological proof for Hezekiah. This is Hezekiah's seal. This seal was found right next to the old city of Jerusalem in the Ophel excavations. And this inscription, it reads, belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. Slam dunk. No question about that. So who was Hezekiah's prophet? We have his scroll right here in front of us. Who was his prophet? Isaiah. Look at this. So in this story, Isaiah was his prophet, and this is the Isaiah Beulah, or the Isaiah seal. It says, belonging to Isaiah the prophet. This seal was found 10 feet from King Hezekiah's seal. They connect perfectly in the archaeology. So in conclusion, I want to ask a question. Why did God feel so compelled to save this city and this king? God said, I'm going to defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. Why did he say that? What did he mean by that? When he says, I'm going to save the city for my own sake. What does that mean? He needed a remnant to live because God had made promises to Israel, hadn't he? Listen to some of these promises. Genesis 12, this is way back at the beginning of Israelite history. God told Abram, get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house to a land that I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation. That's a miracle that God could make Abraham into a great nation. Then it says this in Psalm 105, O offspring of Abraham, his servant, O children of Jacob, his chosen ones, he is the Lord our God. He remembers his covenant forever. God had made covenants with Israel. And he's going to remember those covenants forever. The covenant that he made with Abraham, his sworn promise to Isaac, which he confirmed to Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. So the covenants that God made with Israel were eternal covenants, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan as your portion for an inheritance. Forever. This is your forever inheritance. Well, what happens if Israel is completely wiped out and they cease to exist as a nation? Well, then all these promises are null and void. None of these promises come true. So for God's own name's sake, he had to do this to save it for the promises that he had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then think about God's amazing promises to King David. He says, I'm going to save it for my sake and for my servant David's sake. So what promises did he make to King David? Listen to this. It happened that night, this is right after David had taken the city of Jerusalem, that the word of the Lord came to the prophet Nathan saying, go tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, when your days are fulfilled and you rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body and will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. He says, the son you're going to give birth to, I'm going to establish his kingdom forever. Then he tells us who this son is, and your house and your kingdom shall, establish his name and his kingdom forever, and your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever, according to all these words. So spoke Nathan to David the prophet. So spoke Nathan to David. So in this story, David is telling him, your son, who's going to be Solomon, he's going to come after you. He's going to build a temple for my name. I'm going to build his kingdom forever. So your dynasty, your lineage will be established forever before you. Now, what happens if Hezekiah, who is the direct lineage of King David, and all of his sons are flayed and hung on poles around Jerusalem so that the whole kingly dynasty is killed? What happens to David's dynasty? It's gone. In order for God to keep that promise that he made to David, he had to save Hezekiah. The only way he could keep that promise. So as Christians, we believe there's more to this story. We believe this Old Testament story is concluded in New Testament times, and Matthew 1:1 is the perfect example of that. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Connects it all together. So we believe this all connects together. The saving of Jerusalem in 701 BC connects to the story of Jesus. We believe that this isn't just about Hezekiah or the nation of Israel. This is what Hezekiah prayed. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Yahweh, you, Lord, are the only God. And here we are on the other side of the world, 2,800 years later, remembering this story. And I'm telling you, the God that saved Israel, he's the only God. That's exactly what's happening here. That's why Hezekiah prayed that God would save Israel. So yes, God did save Jerusalem so that Israel would not perish as a nation. He did save Jerusalem so that Hezekiah and his sons would not perish, wouldn't be destroyed. But we believe the story's bigger than that. We believe God saved Hezekiah so that his family line would not be destroyed, so that the promise to David could be fulfilled, so that Jesus, the son of David, would come and be our Savior. That's why we believe it happened. We believe the story's about God's love for you and me. The most cherished book in all of the Bible is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. That verse couldn't have been written if this didn't happen. I want to conclude with one thing because I think this is interesting. This is what we call the Great Exchange. This is what Jesus did for us when he died on the cross. Jesus takes all of our unrighteousness, our sin, our guilt, our punishment, and in exchange, he gives us his righteousness, his sinlessness, his perfection, his forgiveness. If you put your faith in Jesus, he exchanges your yuck for his beauty. And he clothes you in his beauty. How awesome is that? For our sake, God made Jesus to be sin, who knew no sin, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Wow, what a great verse that is. Now, I want to conclude with Isaiah's version of the Great Exchange. It's in this scroll right here, Isaiah chapter 53. This is how the Israel National Museum translated the great Isaiah scroll that predates the birth of Jesus by at least 125 years, probably closer to 250 years. But that doesn't matter because it's before Jesus. Listen to how they translated this chapter. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender plant, like a root out of a dry ground. He had no form, and he had no majesty that we should look at him. And he had no attractiveness that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by others, and a man of sorrows, and familiar with suffering. And like one from whom people hide their faces, we despised him, and we did not value him. Surely he has borne our sufferings and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken and struck down by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. And the punishment that made us whole was upon him, and by his bruises we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned each of us to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, as a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. From detention and judgment he was taken away. And who can even think about his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. He was stricken for the transgression of my people. Then they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich people in his tomb. Although he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth, yet the Lord was willing to crush him, and he made him suffer. Although you make his soul an offering for sin, yet he will see his offspring, and he will prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will triumph in his hand. Out of the suffering of his soul, he will see light and find satisfaction. And through his knowledge, his servant, the righteous one, will make many righteous, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will allot him a portion with the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sins of many and made intercession for their transgressions. Wow. Who can read that? Who can listen to that and not think, that's Jesus? And that was written 100 years before Jesus was born, 150 years before Jesus was born. That's describing perfectly what Jesus did for us in the great Isaiah scroll. And that's the reason that God saved Hezekiah. The reason he saved Jerusalem, the reason he saved Israel was so that that could happen. That prophecy could be fulfilled. So that's my talk on the Assyrian conquest. We'll take another break, and then we'll come back together in another 5 or 10 minutes. So go take a bathroom break or whatever you need to.